Mr. President.
The Senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, I ask the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to speak about something very serious. That issue is about sexual assault in the military, and in support of the Shaheen Amendment, which I co-sponsored in the Senate Armed Services Committee markup. Today I wrote a letter to House Majority Leadership expressing my concern for this issue and asking that it be addressed immediately. The Senate Armed Services Committee recently considered and passed the National Defense Authorization Act for FY 2013, and it awaits full consideration of the Senate. And as we all know, our troops need the tools and resources to complete their mission. It's imperative that it gets brought up right away. As a member of the committee, I join with members of both sides of the aisle in supporting this amendment, which would ensure that women who serve in our armed forces and their families are provided access to abortion services in cases of rape or incest. Sadly, sexual assault of women service members has been recently exposed as far more prevalent than anyone previously thought. As a matter of fact, Mr. President, the Pentagon believes such crimes are vastly underreported. And there's evidence that there are many as 19,000 assaults are committed every year. That's approximately 50 each day. Furthermore, women are serving in harm's way. We know that. And they're often in dangerous locations without access to safe, non-military health services. And given their courageous service, they deserve our care and protection, put quite simply. The language of the amendment is consistent with the long-standing Hyde Amendment, which prevents federal funding for abortions, except for the victims of rape and incest or when the life of the mother is at stake. Mr. President, it's a simple issue. Those who are serving in harm's way, who are victims of such horrific crimes, should be afforded the same rights as citizens they protect and who rely on federal funding for their health care. Our amendment passed out of committee 16-10 on a bipartisan basis, as I referenced earlier in committee. And I will continue to work, I should say, with my colleagues to ensure it remains included in the version that passes the full Senate. As I said, unfortunately, the House Armed Services Committee did not include a similar provision in their version of the bill, and I'm not quite sure why. I would urge the House members to think about the real-world implications of their actions and not block this legislation. I hope that we can work together in a truly bipartisan and bicameral basis to ensure that our amendment language becomes law so that the President may sign it as such. Extending these provisions to our military service women is the right thing to do. I thank the Chair and I yield the floor. Thank you, Mr. President. Without the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaga.
The Senator from Massachusetts.
Suggest the absence of a quorum.
The Senate's in a quorum call. The senator from Illinois.
Ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, ask consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
On June 15, 1982, 30 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a landmark decision, Plyler versus Doe. In 1975, the state of Texas had passed a law that allowed public schools to refuse admission to children who were undocumented. The law also withheld state funds from local school districts if they were to be used for education of undocumented kids. In the Plyler case, the court struck down the Texas law and held that it's unconstitutional to deny public education to children on the basis of their immigration status. Justice William Brennan, who authored the opinion, wrote, and I quote, "By denying these children a basic education, we deny them the ability to live within the structure of our civic institutions and foreclose any realistic possibility that they will contribute in even the smallest way to the progress of our nation." The year was 1982, and in the 30 years since Plyler versus Doe was decided, millions of immigrant children have received an education and become contributing members to America and society. They are today's doctors, soldiers, teachers, engineers, and they make us a better nation. But since it was decided, Plyler has been under attack from anti-immigration forces. On the very day the decision was announced, there was a lawyer at the Justice Department who wrote a memo criticizing his superiors for not arguing in support of this Texas law that was stricken by the court. Keep in mind, at the time Plyler was decided, the Justice Department was not under the control of a Democratic president. Ronald Reagan was president. Who was the Justice Department lawyer criticizing the Reagan administration for not being tough enough on immigrant children? His name was John Roberts. 23 years later, in 2005, he was nominated to be Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. During his confirmation hearing, Chief Justice Roberts said that he would not vote to overturn that case. And he said it was, quote, well-settled law. For example, he said Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court decision that ordered desegregation of schools, was also well-settled law. Plyler versus Doe is often called the Brown versus Board of Education of the immigrants in America. But when I asked John Roberts whether he considered Plyler to be well-settled law, he refused to answer my question. Over the years, there have been attempts to pass federal legislation overturning this Supreme Court decision. In 1996, Congress was considering a bill to restrict illegal immigration. Representative Elton Gallegly, a Republican from California, offered an amendment to overturn Plyler versus Doe and permit states to bar undocumented children from public schools. At the time I was in the House, I voted against the Gallegly amendment. So did most of the Democrats. But most Republicans voted for it, and it passed. President Clinton threatened a veto if the Gallegly amendment was included in the final version of the immigration bill. And the amendment was also opposed by a bipartisan group of senators, including the late, great Senator Ted Kennedy and our colleague, Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison of Texas. As a result of this opposition, the Gallegly amendment was dropped from the final version of the bill. The latest threat to Plyler versus Doe is a spate of state laws targeting legal and illegal immigrants. On June 9, 2011, 1 year ago this week, Alabama Governor Robert Bentley signed into law HB 56, the strictest immigration law in the country. Under Alabama law HB 56, it is a crime for a legal immigrant to fail to carry documents proving his or her legal status at all times. Police officers in Alabama are required to check the immigration status of any individual if they have, quote, reasonable suspicion that he or she is undocumented. I'm especially concerned about the provisions of the Alabama law that involve schools in enforcing immigration laws. For example, in Alabama, schools must check the immigration status of every student and report that information to the state. And schools are authorized to report students and parents they believe to be undocumented to the federal government. Last year, the U.S. Justice Department and the U.S. Education Department sent a letter to every school district in the country warning that enrollment practices that discourage students from attending school could violate federal civil rights laws. The letter reminded school districts of their obligation to provide access to undocumented students under the Supreme Court's decision in Plyler versus Doe. Supporters of the Alabama law argue that it doesn't prohibit immigrant children from attending public schools, but involving schools in enforcing immigration laws will clearly discourage immigrant children from attending. Last month, Tom Perez, the head of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, sent a letter to the Alabama Superintendent of Education about their department's investigation of Alabama's HB 56. Mr. Perez said the Justice Department has concluded that, quote, in the immediate aftermath of HB 56 implementation, Hispanic student absence rates tripled, while absence rates for other groups of students remained virtually flat. And the rate of total withdrawals of Hispanic children substantially increased to 13.4% of all Hispanic students in Alabama schools. Mr. Perez also said Hispanic children reported increased anxiety, diminished concentration in school, deteriorating grades, and increased hostility, bullying, and intimidation. The author of the education provision of the Alabama law has made it clear his real goal is to overturn Plyler v. Doe. If this challenge should make it to the Supreme Court, it could find a receptive audience in the Chief Justice, who criticized Plyler v. Doe when it was decided and refused to say it was well-settled law when he appeared before the Senate Judiciary Committee. I think this is the wrong approach for America. Instead of challenging Plyler v. Doe, we should be building on its legacy. 11 years ago, I introduced the DREAM Act. 11 years. The DREAM Act is a bill that would give a select group of immigrant students who grew up in America the chance to earn their way to legal status if they do one of two things: serve in America's military or at least complete 2 years of college in good standing. These young people were brought to the United States as children. I'm sure the presiding officer knows many in his home state. They grew up in this country, and thanks to Plyler v. Doe, they got a chance to go to school. They are the valedictorians, star athletes, and ROTC leaders in so many schools. It wasn't their decision to come to this country. They were infants and kids when the decision was made. Their parents made the decision. The fundamental premise of the DREAM Act is that we shouldn't punish kids for any wrongdoing by their parents. That isn't the American way. As Senator Marco Rubio has said, just because the parents got it wrong, we shouldn't hold it against the kids. As Justice Brennan said in Plyler v. Doe, legislation directing the onus of a parent's misconduct against his children does not comport with fundamental conceptions of justice. The DREAM Act isn't just the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do for America. The DREAM Act would help our economy by giving these talented immigrants a chance to become part of it. Tomorrow's engineers, entrepreneurs, small business owners, teachers, doctors. And the DREAM Act would strengthen America's national security by giving thousands of highly qualified, well-educated young people a chance to serve in America's armed forces. It is one of the greatest levelers in America. When we decided to integrate the armed forces under President Harry Truman, we really set the stage for the civil rights revolution in this country. When men and women in the military were recognized for their inherent worth and commitment to this nation, rather than the color of their skin, it set a standard that now guides our nation. Almost every week, I do my best to come to the Senate floor to tell a story of one of these young people who would qualify for the DREAM Act. Today, I want to tell you about Al O'Care. Al was born in Nigeria in 1990. In 1991, Al's father was killed by the Nigerian police after he wrote newspaper columns criticizing the Nigerian government. The killing of Al's father was documented by the State Department's annual Human Rights Report. In 1995, Al's mother fled Nigeria and brought her little 5-year-old boy to the United States. Al's mother, because of the murder or killing of her husband, applied for asylum. Her application was denied, and she was deported in 2005 when Al was 15, after 10 years in the United States. Today, Al is 21 years of age. He lives in the state of Washington. His mother's sister, who is a U.S. citizen, is Al's legal guardian and has raised him since Al's mother was deported. Al graduated from Rogers High School near Tacoma, Washington. He is currently attending Central Washington University. He's an honor student, 3.5 grade point average. He's an avid basketball and football player. He's an active volunteer in the community, For instance, he recently headed up a fundraising drive for the Hope Children's Hospital. I asked a lot of these dreamers to send me letters about their view of the United States and their hope for the future. This is what Al wrote to me. I've been in accelerated academic programs most of my educational life and hope to be a medical doctor someday, to contribute to the well-being of fellow humans. I hope to continue to emulate and walk in the great academic shoes of my late father, who earned a PhD degree from the University of Paris in France. My family and community support have been enormous, and it gives me zeal to work hard in my studies, to be able to lend a hand to others in need, to realize a bright future. Unfortunately, Al has been placed in deportation proceedings. Under our immigration laws, his aunt, who is a U.S. citizen, and his legal guardian can't sponsor him for citizenship. Now, Al O'Care grew up in America. He has never committed a crime. We've already invested in him. He's received his entire education from kindergarten through college in the United States. He didn't get any help in going to college financially from the federal government. He's barred from that because he's undocumented. So he had to find other sources and work his way through college. But he made it. He has a great potential to contribute to America. He doesn't remember a thing about Nigeria, and he doesn't speak any of their native languages. Despite all that, the laws of America say that Al should be deported. Here's what Al said about that possibility. I don't remember anything about my mother's country of Nigeria. I can't even speak the language. Every experience I've had in life that I can remember has been in the United States of America. Everyone I know and care about is here, except for my mom, who was sadly removed and remains in hiding in fear of her life. Despite that, the Department of Homeland Security has decided to put the Department of Homeland Security, fortunately, has decided to put Al's deportation on hold. I support this decision, but I know it's only temporary. It doesn't give Al permanent status of any kind, and he's still at risk of deportation in the future. The only way for Al to become a citizen is for the DREAM Act to become a law of the land. Mr. President, would America be a better nation if Al O'Care were deported? Of course not. Al's not an isolated example. There are literally thousands of others just like him, only asking for a chance, only asking for justice. Plyler versus Doe gave Al O'Care and other bright, accomplished, ambitious young people the opportunity to obtain an education in America. The DREAM Act would give them a chance to fulfill their God-given potential and become our future doctors, engineers, teachers, and soldiers. Mr. President, it was a couple weeks ago that a lot of these DREAM Act students keep in touch with us, and one contacted our office to say he'd given up. He'd lived in America all his life. He'd been educated here, made his way through college, was looking forward to being an engineer. He'd waited 11 years for the passage of the DREAM Act, and it hadn't happened. He had decided that he had no choice but to move to Canada. So now his talents will go to Canada. I have nothing against Canada. It's a great nation and a great neighbor. But why would we give up someone we've educated and trained to be a part of America? On the 30th anniversary of Plyler versus Doe, I again ask my colleagues in both parties to support the DREAM Act. Let's give Al O'Care and so many other young people like him a chance to contribute more fully to the only country they have ever called home. It's the right thing to do, and it will make America a stronger nation. Mr. President, I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka.